Hey, what's up? How you doing? It's your friend Phil here. Welcome to PMP Exam Drive Time. Today we're talking about a process called Plan Scope Management. Now, Plan Scope Management is the beginning of what I call a repetitive theme in the PMBOK guide across triple constraint planning processes. You might need to listen to this twice. One, I'm on the road, it's a bit noisy. And secondly, I will speak quite fast because I'm almost out of time even before I started. Take a look at plan schedule management, plan scope management, plan cost management, plan risk management. Look for commonalities in these processes as far as the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs are concerned. Okay? You have similarities in plan scope, plan schedule, plan cost, and plan risk. The inputs are similar. You have the project charter as an input, you have EEFs and OPAs as inputs, and you have the project management plan that we talked about yesterday as an input. So for these processes, you're going to hear me say the repetitive theme, the recurring theme in the PMBOK guide: time, cost, scope, and risk. You have the schedule, the cost, the scope, and the risk with similar inputs in planning. So we have the project charter as an input to plan scope management, our process for today. We have the project management plan, we have EFs and OPAs. The output is the scope management plan. Okay. Now, I know this is our first take on scope. I'm sorry to have to dunk you in like this. But scope management is all about planning, first of all, how to manage scope, and then defining all the things, all the parameters that we need to observe, things that we need to do to get the work done. Everything that we need to do to meet that deliverable, to meet that objective, to get the project to completion, right? We need to identify these things and we need to catalog them. We need to put them into various documents and have them in different formats. That's what we do in scope management. But the first process of scope management is called plan scope management. That's where we are today. Okay? Plan scope management involves putting together a plan for how to manage scope. Putting together a plan that documents all of the scope processes that will be carried out on the project. And in scope management, we have plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS, validate scope, and control scope. And in plan scope management, we need to identify which of these processes are we going to carry out and how are we going to carry them out. That's what we do here. So your scope management plan is the roadmap for how you are going to catalog all that needs to be done to get the project to completion. All the work that needs to be done must first be identified. We don't want to start the project and begin to realize, oh, we need to do that. Oh, I forgot, we need to do that. No, we want to identify as much as possible up front. In fact, in fully plan driven, we want to identify everything. Where we're using predictive life cycles or fully plan driven life cycles, right? We want to identify everything that needs to be done. So before we begin to identify everything that needs to be done, we need to plan how are we going to identify. It sounds kind of like the chicken and the egg thing, but you first of all have to plan how are we going to scope out the project before you scope out the project. And as a result, you get a scope management plan as an output. So as part of this process, you also will obtain a requirements management plan. The requirements management plan is a plan for how to collect requirements and how to manage requirements. These two plans are really what you get from the plan scope management process. Scope management plan and requirements management plan. Now, it's really tricky. I almost forgot. But then I remembered, hey, wait, it's that process where you've got these two plans. See, in the PMBOK guide, there are two processes out of the 47 that are different in that they give you two plans. One is plan scope management and the other is plan quality management. So just be aware of that. But the bottom line is that the requirements management plan is a plan for how to collect requirements. How are you going to collect them? Focus group, facilitated workshop, questionnaires, surveys. How are you going to collect requirements? You need to plan how to collect requirements before you collect requirements. You need to plan how to scope out the project before you begin to scope it out, before you begin to collect the requirements, before you begin to define the scope, before you create a work breakdown structure. I hope you know what that is. If you don't, well, we'll talk about that on a future day. How are we going to get the customer to approve the deliverable when it's done, or check and approve the deliverable? If you're building a vessel like a customer of ours, that could be an extremely involved process to do a validate scope for that incrementally and also at the end, and get all the folks involved like the Coast Guard and what have you to ensure that you've done a good job on their project or on an associated government project, or the Navy, or whoever the project is for. So it could be a very involved thing, just planning how we're going to validate scope. See, you need to plan this stuff up front. And lastly, control scope. Control scope is where you would plan, or where you would carry out the plan for making sure that people aren't adding extras, people aren't gold plating. So for example, you could ask the question, how are we going to prevent gold plating? And you have a plan for how to prevent gold plating. You see? So all this stuff needs to be planned up front. How are we going to define scope? How are we going to collect requirements? How are we going to create the WBS? How are we going to prevent gold plating? How are we going to get the customer to incrementally, or maybe it's a one-time event in your firm, depending on the product that you're working with, you know, how are we going to get sign-off? How are we going to get acceptance? All right? So there are various parameters, folks. Many things to think about in scope management. But the bottom line is, in plan scope management, you think about all these things and you come out with a plan for them. All right? Thanks for joining today, and make sure you take a look at all of that terminology below. And I will speak to you tomorrow on our next episode of 40 Days to PMP and CPM Exam Success. Thank you for your audience. Bye for now.